can't find my son. His name is Oyebo. You know, the little one. My name is Zenobia. I can't find my son. And the chief said, where was he the last time that you saw him? And she said, he was outside of the hut with the clay pots, and I can't find him. And the chief raised his hand to silence her. And he said, how long ago was that? She said, just a little while. And the chief had the servant send off a signal, and all of the men from the village came to his hut. And the chief said, Oyebo is missing. You know, the little one, Zenobia's son. Go and find him and bring him back to me. And they went to the north and the south and the east and the west, and they couldn't find this child. They went further to the north and the south and the east and the west, and still they could not find Oyebo. And they came back to the chief with their heads hung low, and they said, we've looked everywhere, and we can't find this child. And the chief was getting ready to say words that were very angry, but he looked over their heads and he said, it's getting dark. There's no way you're going to find that boy in the jungle at night. Everyone will go and look for him in the morning. Zenobia looked at the chief. She was shocked. She said, no, he's sickly, he's frail, he'll never last in the jungle all night. Please, can someone go with me to look for my son? But instead, the chief had two of the women from the village escort Zenobia to her hut. And that whole night, she sat there and she rocked and she cried and she rocked and she cried and she prayed. And when the sun rose the next morning, the first person at the chief's hut was Zenobia. And then came the village people. And the chief stood up tall and proud and he said, I want you to find this boy and bring him back to me. Everyone from the village knew that the chief was not pleased, and so they all took off running, and they went to the north and the south and the east and the west, and they went further than some of them had ever gone before, and they still could not find this child. Till finally they came back to the village, and they told the chief, we've looked everywhere, and we can't find him. Some of the people in the back said she should have paid more attention to her child. Some of them said maybe a lion has eaten him. We can't find this boy. But before the chief could open his mouth, an elder, a little old lady about so high, walked out into the crowd and she said, this time when you look for the boy, I want you to, and before she could finish a sentence, a warrior said, didn't you hear us, woman? We said we had looked for the, and another warrior snatched him back. You see, under no circumstances do you ever disrespect an elder. And so the old woman continued to speak as if the warrior hadn't said anything at all. And she said, this time, when you go and look for the boy, I want you all to hold hands. And so they all took off again, and they went through the jungle, and they walked and they walked and they walked in every different direction until finally before them was a vast field full of tall grass. And they all held hands, and they walked through the field with the sun beaming down on their faces and their backs, and insects flying about their faces. But still, they could not find this boy. They were ready to give up and go home. When, shh, did you hear that? They heard a noise. And the warrior who was so rude in the village took off running in this direction. He was running so fast until he almost tripped over Oyebo. And when he turned to look at this boy, there was a frown on his face. You see, Oyebo no longer looked like a little boy. Oyebo looked more like an old man. And one of the women from the village started to cry. And the warrior picked this boy up and they ran back to the village. You see, there was honor in being the one to hand the child over to the chief. And when the chief held this boy in his arms, There was a sad look on his face and a frown on his forehead. And he turned and he handed Oyibo to his mother. Zenobia looked at her baby, and she kissed his face and she cried, and she fell to the ground with her baby in her lap. You see, Oyibo opened his eyes one time and looked in the face of his mother. He had a bit of a smile, and then his smile was gone. His hands moved once, and then they were still. You see, Oyibo died in the arms of his mother. Zenobia cried, "Not my baby, not my son!" And she continued to cry until she just couldn't cry anymore. And then when she looked in the faces of the village people, she said, "Why didn't you hold hands sooner? Why didn't you hold hands sooner?" And so you see, Danny, the moral of the story is, it's all right for us to touch one another. And it's all right for us to embrace one another. And it's all right for us to love one another, you see, because we are family.
That's a beautiful